What's up, guys? Jimmy's back with you from Time with Steel. Yesterday I lost the battle between a ball joint and a sledgehammer on a customer's car. Pretty bruised up because I'm an idiot, but decided I'm going to take today off and take it easy on my hand. I'm going to do some wiring on the Ecoboost build, and hopefully by the time the end of this video is done, we'll be firing it for the first time just to make sure it runs. I've got a few things I got to do. This harness that came with this motor was for a 2014 Focus ST. So because I've converted it to rear orientation and added a bunch of Mustang parts to it, obviously the harness doesn't fit perfectly. Stuart at SCS Delta USA went ahead and cut the stock harness up to make it a standalone and hooked me up with a GDI4 out of the UK from SCS Delta. And really the only things that I have to do on the motor side at this point are extend the throttle position sensor and extend a manifold pressure sensor, because the sensor's location is further away on the Mustang intake. This is the sensor I'm talking about here. And this little guy right here has to go there. And then if you look down there, that little red plug has to go all the way to this throttle body, which is significantly further away than on the stock Focus intake. So I'm going to go ahead and knock that out. Pretty simple. These harnesses run 100 gauge. I got this from Del City. I'm just using one color so you can buy it in bulk, and this will all be hidden once it's finished anyway. But anyways, I'm going to get to this and I'll update you as we move on to the next phase. Alright, I got the first jumper made here, and you see connections, solder, heat shrink. Always leave a little bit of the wire color that you've messed with exposed so you can trace the wires. And I don't make the harness short, but I don't make it too long either. You just want a little bit of flex, because by the time you clean this all up and go to route it, you don't want it to be super tight. But for those of you who might be new to electrical work, I like doing it. It's fun to me. I would say go to Radio Shack if you needed stuff, but that doesn't exist anymore. But just a basic solder torch. This is a really nice one my buddy Donnie gave me. Harness tape, electrical tape, there is a difference, some heat shrink, whatever size wire you're going to use, a lighter, a razor blade, some good solder. You can use flux core, you can use regular solder, use flux paste, whatever you want to do. Some diagonal cutters, some vice grip. Well, this brand is vice grip, but I like to get some, these are worth their weight in gold, man, automatic strippers. And then I like these cheap strippers because, believe it or not, if you're using quick connects, these things are better at crimping those than the fancy ones are. And these are also good for stripping wire if you need to, but that's basically it. And you know, like my uncle always says with welding, set yourself up with a nice workstation so you're comfortable. But we got one done. Now I'm going to move on to the throttle position sensor. Alright, well, I don't pretend to be an electrical wiring expert, and soldering and wiring technique is about as debated as welding is, so I'm sure someone's gonna watch this video and be like, this guy's all jacked up. Listen, I'm not gonna be good, but I'm good enough. So anyhow, like I said, a buddy of mine was having some trouble soldering, so I'm just gonna kind of do this real quick to show an example. I've got some good quality flux core wire solder, but most guys will still dip the wires themselves in some kind of flux paste. I don't have any, so I'm just gonna settle for what I've got right now. But what I've done is I've decided the length of this harness that it needs to be, and I've cut 6 equal lengths of wire, and I've spliced each end a ½ inch on all of them, and I've pre-stripped the harness plug that I'm gonna use, that I need to extend. And then I've also taken some 1/8 inch, because that's, you know, the appropriate size for this wire, heat shrink, and I've cut equal size pieces. I can't tell you how many times I've soldered wire together and then realized I forgot to put the heat shrink on. So what I'm going to do here is solder up one side, the plug side, with wires, and then I'll add heat shrink to that, and then I'll connect it inside the car. But anyhow, here we go. So like I said before, it's all about comfort. The way you want to twist these wires together is you take each wire and you put the middle of the strip section of each touching each other, and then you take both hands, and I know this sounds stupid, but you got to twist each hand evenly. Just like if you've ever done safety wire before, you got to twist each hand, not just one. And if you're new at it, you'll tend to just twist one hand, and then it doesn't equally distribute the wire, and the wire will fall off. But as you can see, the tighter you make that, the better it looks once the heat shrink is applied. Okay, so now I've had my solder gun going here, so it's nice and hot. So then I'll just set the wire on the solder gun, and I like to cheat because I get impatient. And I'll take the solder and I'll kind of dip it right next to the wire, and if it accepts it immediately, then I know my solder gun's hot enough, and then I just run it on the wire. And you don't want it to look like the Terminator when you're done. Like, that's probably even too much what I just put on there. You just want it to start changing the color of the wire. When it looks chrome like Arnold Schwarzenegger right there, that's too much solder. And I'm sitting here talking to you guys, and I burned this insulation on this wire a little bit, but it's really that easy. And then what I'll do, once I have the connection strong, you want to wait a little bit till you put your heat shrink on, just because if you try to put the heat shrink on right away, it'll melt as you try to slide it over the top. But see if I'm in camera. So there's my heat shrink. I fed it on one end of the wire, making sure this wire's cooled down enough to touch. And you know, when you're using junkyard harnesses, you'll find some damage here and there. This wire actually, if you notice, that wire was split, the insulation was split on the outside, so I'm just going to put heat shrink over all of it. You generally want to make sure you can see the color of the wire, so that you can diagnose which wire is the problem later. But for this one, I'll just connect this wire last, and I'll make sure I connect all these other ones to the right colors so I don't screw it up. And you just I like to use a lighter. You can use your actual soldering iron if it's hot enough. And you just take the lighter and just keep it moving. You don't want to hold it in one spot or it'll burn. And that's it. So I've got 5 more of those to do, and then I can connect it inside the car. All right, there's our completed, this is the TPS throttle body sensor here. You can see it's the same length on all the lines, and here you can see what I was talking about. If you don't twist them real smooth, it's really easy to see once you put the heat shrink on. But you can see I left just a little bit of each wire color, so that I can tell what wire they are. And now I'm on just like spark plugs, so you don't screw it up. Pick a color, connect one wire to that other color. Before you do that, don't forget to put a piece of heat shrink on here so you can clean it up once it's done. All right, so I got the harness side done. I've extended the manifold pressure sensor and the actual throttle body sensor itself. Remember how I told you guys not to forget to put heat shrink on a wire? Well, guess what? I forgot to put heat shrink on a wire, so I'll have to go back and fix that because it's gonna annoy me. But this is what I like to do. I put little mini zip ties at the connector where I solder all the joints because it takes a little stress off of them, and it also just makes the bundle a little bit more tidy. And really, if you have to troubleshoot wiring, when you pull a harness apart, if you zip tie individual sensors like this, then you know like wires are going to like wires, and it makes things easier to troubleshoot down the road when you forget all of this stuff and something breaks. Other than that, I think the motor side is pretty much done for test fire. Really the only things at this point, I have to connect the T-map sensor, which is a temperature and manifold pressure sensor that is post intercooler but pre-throttle body. I already have that sensor. Doesn't need to be plugged in for start, but I will probably plug the sensor in and just let it sit here so it can read air temperature. And then this wideband oxygen sensor is a standalone Ford Performance one. The motor will start with this, not in the exhaust. So I want to make sure the motor runs. I have to hear it run before I do exhaust and intake and all that kind of stuff. So now I'm going to move on to the inside of the car. I hate wiring relays, and it saves you a lot of time, and it looks a lot better if you just buy like a Busman or Eaton setup. I got this from 12 Volt Connection, 12voltconnection.com. He makes an awesome pre-wired relay unit that basically he overbuilds them and adds a much bigger negative bus bar, so these things can handle a lot more amps than the typical off-the-shelf ones. He pre-wires all the relays. They come with little name tags on them for each wire, so you know where it goes. Awesome instructions. So I bought that to save myself time and money in the long run, so I don't have to make something myself. But what I'm getting at is take the time to think about what your system needs and make yourself a little map. This is what I took his map that he provided, and I wrote out each circuit that I'm going to program to it. Basically, I have 5 relays here that are going to correspond to 5 different systems. Basically, I'm going to run my ECU on a 10 amp full power permanent fuse. I'm going to have a ignition 12 volt fuse on a 10 amps, so that's 2 ECU powers. My ECU uses negative output as triggers, so basically it triggers the ground in the relay, and that's how it activates the circuit. So my first relay is going to be my ECU main. That's going to power my lambda system, my VVT, my wastegate, my recirc, my ignition coils, and my starter. My ECU input to the fuel pump is going to go to my second relay. That's going to be at a 30 amp fuse. The DeLorean uses a complicated fan fail relay garbage setup that is failure prone. It's one fan assembly, which I've upgraded to some SPAL fans, but the way I'm going to wire this is I'm going to run 2 relays. Each relay is going to power its own fan, and they're both going to be tied to the same fuel or radiator trigger relay in the ECU. So if something happens where one fan burns up, I won't lose both fans, I'll just lose one. And each one of those fans is going to be on a 30 amp fuse. And then lastly, my ECU 12 volt ignition power is going to be on my last relay. So everything is going to be relay driven except for the full-time permanent power, which is at a 10 amp fuse. Well, I'll show you where I'm at so far on this. Now, honestly, like, when people say, oh, I don't want to remove this because I'm going to go back to stock later, I call bull. Because you think I'm ever going to put a PRV back in this car? No. So when I die, the next person that has this car is just going to have to figure out an Ecoboost. So what I am doing, and it looks like a rat's nest, but it's really not, you just take your time, is I'm removing all the K-jet wiring and all of the unnecessary circuits from the car that were on the old engine or the engine compartment. Now, obviously, this car, being a Lucas electrical system, has already got enough load on it, so I'm removing any unnecessary wiring. Now, before you purists go freaking out, I will be maintaining all main harness circuits. I will just be basically heat shrinking them all into a loom. So if for some stupid reason you wanted to go back to stock, you could. And everything's roughed up in here, but right now you can see I'm going to have my ECU mounted on the back firewall, and I'm going to have that Busman unit I was telling you about. It's a super nice unit. High quality, super thick cable. I've got a 4-gauge welding cable going from my battery direct to supply the power to this unit, so we'll never have any issues there. But super simple to wire this because he's done all the hard stuff for you. You just got to hook up your relay triggers, your permanent powers, and like I said, everything's is labeled. I mean, look at how nice this is. This right here, if I could get to it with my hand on the camera and my other hand on the wiring here. But okay, this says triggers, relay triggers, and it comes in a nice bundle, and it's got a little Velcro retainer on it. This one says relay output, same thing, beautifully colored wire. Each color of the wire corresponds to the color of the circuit. And then like this one is your constant outputs. Now, I'm not being paid by any of these dudes. This guy probably never even see this video, because who even watches my YouTube channel? But I just like to highlight awesome products, and that's an awesome product. As far as the ECU itself, super simple. After Stuart rewired everything, 2 plugs. You've got a 6-way super seal connector and a 4-way super seal connector. Those will be tying into my circuits into this box. And then you've got a lead that comes off, and that lead basically ties into your pedal. Now this is off of a wrecked 2014 Focus ST, and you can see that's where it plugs in right there. So for all intents and purposes, the motor is going to be completely separate, harness, power, everything compared to the stock engine. It's all right here. Now you might be asking yourselves, if you're a fellow DeLorean owner, why I put it there in the open instead of hiding it in the relay compartments. Because like over here, I've pretty much eliminated this entire relay compartment, ECU compartment. And if I was doing this on a stock DeLorean style car where somebody wanted to maintain an original look, I would just mount all of this stuff over here underneath the back deck. However, my car's got a time machine interior, as you can see, so once this thing's all reassembled, you're gonna see a complete back bulkhead here made out of aluminum with all the props and all that stuff on it. And I'm building this car to drive and be able to service on road trips. So the way I have my rear time machine bulkhead set up is I've got 3 screws here. I pull this panel out, and then I'd be able to easily access the motor side and the car side. Now on the car side, when this is all cleaned up, all of the stock stuff that still applies is going to be in the stock locations. So serviceability wise, if I pull up a DeLorean manual and it tells me the fuel pump runs off a number 7 fuse, I'm going to go in here, find number 7 fuse, and I'm going to change it. Because I'm keeping everything car-wise stock with the exception of the engine. Now I did repurpose the starter solenoid. This relay right here with my thumbs on is the standard DeLorean starter relay. I did eliminate the safety bypass that the automatics come with. This is a stick. I just put it to full-time ground. So you can start my car with it in gear. Don't start it in gear. Problem solved. So I will be retaining the stock starter circuit because it's easy. All I've got to do is run one singular wire to the starter. So again, this looks intimidating, but my buddy Luke said one time, like, if you look at an EFI conversion as in its entirety, it's overwhelming. It's like Godzilla, you know. You just take it one circuit at a time, and it's actually extremely simple. The only rear bulkhead circuits that I'm really retaining, this black connector here powers the taillight harness. And there's a few other sensor wires in here that I'll be keeping, but most of that's gone. And you can see here, I eliminated the stock bulkhead retainer because it's ugly and it has stuff that I don't need anymore. So I drew this up in QCAD. I sent it to Send Cut Send, and they laser cut it for me. I got this connector from DIY EFI. It's a weatherproof style GM Delphi connector, and it's got way more circuits than I need, but it leaves expandability later. And when you're not using circuits, you just put a waterproof plug in there, and that's fine. This power cable here, all these cables I made myself out of 4-gauge welding wire. They're better quality cables than you're gonna buy unless you buy expensive cables, and they're easy to make yourself. And I did it this way because this actually powers all the main circuits in the DeLorean on the back side of the firewall, and this actually grounds all the main circuits on the back side of the firewall. And also it enables me to hook up a battery charger from the back of the car easily, or do a jump start from the back of the car easily. So I retained, it would have been easy for me to just delete this entire thing and hide all the wires, but I want to keep the car easily serviceable, and I want to drive this car. So basically, your negative battery cable comes out of the battery, it grounds to the rear trailing arm mount like stock. Positive comes off the battery, goes direct to the starter. Another cable goes from the starter to the alternator, and then a cable goes from the alternator to this jump start post, and that's what you see here. Grounding circuit wise, this ground cable goes directly to the engine mount, and that engine mount is grounded directly to the, or there's another cable grounding that engine mount and the engine to that same spot. And right here, same thing on the other side. And actually, I misspoke over here. I like to have a grounding cable going directly from an alternator mount bolt to the frame, because that guarantees good contact for your alternator for charging, because your alternator grounds through the block. So the engine and the alternator on this side are grounding through the cable. The other side of that cable meets the same ground cable that goes up to the bulkhead. And then, just in case, the driver's side block also has a ground cable that goes to the motor mount. So all the wires are 4 gauge, they're all weather sealed. That's it. It's a pretty simple electrical system. So hopefully I haven't bored you with all the details. I'm going to start attacking this massive wiring setup probably after I put the kid to bed tonight. We'll catch you guys later. One last thing before dinner. I'm going to be running a Delphi fuel pump. Really, the fuel circuit in a DeLorean is super easy. It's a ground and a power. I'm also going to be running a Dave McQueen fuel level computer so that my stock fuel gauge works. And this fuel pump is going to be now triggered by my modern ECU and relay panel. So I misspoke earlier. It was a bad example to give you a fuel pump fuse, but you get the idea. All right, so another thing I forgot to mention before dinner. So this, I went ahead and paid to have the a CAN interface installed into the harness, and that enables me to run a CAN based gauge system. Like I can run a standalone dash like AIM MXS Delta, or not Delta, Strata. So that's pretty cool. What's not cool is that a little plug they give you uses male screws, and then the CAN plug is also male screws, and neither one of them are long enough to repurpose the 2 plugs. So I'll probably get some longer bolts and make this happen. But you think for $2,500 2 years ago that, and $250 for a CAN setup, that they would come up with something better than this to connect the 2 of them. That's my bitch and gripe for the night. Okay, dinner time. Hey, what's up? Jimmy with you. It's midnight, day 1 of wiring. And did I get everything I wanted done? Absolutely not. But believe it or not, it doesn't probably look much different to you on camera, but I have a lot done here. So cleaned up a lot of this relay compartment. The Lambda relay is gone. This is going to be the rear defrost timer, which I'll probably never use, but I'll put one in there. Cleaned up all the grounds on that circuit, so that's straight. Gotten rid of some previous owner hack job fan fail wiring. I have the fans completely isolated to some 12 gauge wires. Yellow is one fan, orange is the other fan, each going to a relay. That's triggered by the modern ECU. Got the 4-way super connector here to power the ECU. Got 12 volt ignition, power constant, and grounds for each. So the ECU has power through the relays wired. This here is the relay negative output trigger signals for activating things like fuel pump, lambda, not lambda, oxygen sensor, recirc valve, stuff like that. That is all wired. I would have been done tonight, but the instructions I got from SCS Delta are vague at best, and I don't know what these 2 wires are, so I have a due out to them for that. All the relay trigger wires that I know are wired. Fuses are put in. Need to get another fuse here, but so basically the overall basic system is there. I have a few connections left to make. So far, stock DeLorean wise, I've eliminated all the fan fail original circuits, Lambda ECU, and all of these K-jet circuits right here. Got the fuel pump isolated, so the DeLorean RPM relay is gone. It'll be fed now by the modern ECU. And I think that's quitting time for tonight. Like I said, took a while to get this little stuff done, but one other thing, I cleaned up, like I said before, on the engine. Each individual circuit that I know is done, I've got black zip ties on, and something I like to do is these junk white zip ties that suck because they break easy. I leave them on things that I have to finish. You see all these white zip ties in here, so next time I come out, it's easy to find what I haven't finished because they stand out. So that's my technique. But yeah, this is the nightmare that I'm living right now. All that's come out of the car, so we're getting closer. Tomorrow or the next opportunity I get, I'll finish this wiring, at least get it so where the motor wiring is finished, and then I'll wire the fuel pump up front, wire the fans up front, and fingers crossed I should be ready for a test fire. Alright, we'll see you next time. What's up, all you crazy cats and kittens? Day 2. I've got some updates here. Should look significantly better to you than it did last night. I mean, there's still a whole bunch of garbage here, but the circuits are wired for the engine. I did my little zip tie method I told you about. So if you take a big zip tie off here, each one of these harnesses is individually zipped and labeled. I left all of my harness tags actually on the wires, so help the next guy out down the road someday. But super simple. All the grounds, all the power feeds, everything for the engine is independent of the DeLorean, so I don't have to worry about garbage Lucas Electrical anymore. I'm running 6 relays, and I've got a 4-gauge power feed that goes directly to the back of the bulkhead, meets up with the starter wire, provides clean battery power to this at all times. I am pulling an ignition signal from the DeLorean, and all that really is a 12-volt ignition signal that energizes the 12-volt trigger side of all the relays, and then the ECU closes the relay circuit and then activates power from the relays by sending negative signal outputs. So this first fuse here is 10 amp fuse. That's ECU permanent power, so anytime the battery's plugged in, the ECU retains memory and power. These next 4 fuses are blank because I'm not using them, but these are all constant output, so if I need constant power feed for anything in the future, I can simply just come in here and add it. And I've actually, you can see it here in the harness, I've heat shrinked over the ends so they don't cause any fire or anything like that. And there's no fuses, so there's no power going to them anyway. And then the next one here corresponds to the top fuse relay, the second one to the next relay, next one, next relay, and vice versa. The 10 amp fuse at the bottom is the 12-volt ignition power to the ECU. So both ECU feeds are 10 amps, so they'll blow easy if there's ever a problem. We don't want to fry the expensive ECU. And then I went ahead and all the colors of the wires correspond to my little map that I made here. That I used the 12-volt connections map and just added all my circuits to it. So main relay blue is this top relay here, and the trigger blue wires and the output wires are all blue. So anything you see in the harness that's blue responds to the main relay, which powers VVT, lambda, wastegate, recirc, coils, starter, all that good stuff. Next thing, fuel pump. This next relay is fuel pump. Same thing, any wire that's green in this harness is either a trigger wire or an output wire. You can see this is the DeLorean fuel pump feed wire, so that's connected to the green. So the ECU now controls fuel pump activation and deactivation, so I'll be getting rid of the stupid rollover switch because it's not really needed with a modern ECU. Next up is radiator fans. Now I've split each fan in the assembly into its own relay. And same thing, each fan has its own color wire that corresponds to its relay. So all orange wires go to this relay and power one fan, all yellow wires go to this relay and power the other fan. So I'll never lose both fans at the same time anymore. If one fries, the other one should stay working. And then finally, this last relay, its only function in life is to switch on 12-volt ignition power to the ECU. And when it does that, it simultaneously switches all the relay triggers so that all these relays come to life. So you can see why, to me, it's worth spending 150 bucks on a nice setup like this, because when this is all buttoned up, it's gonna look super clean, super serviceable. And if my engine ever stops working, I just gotta go to this. Over here, I have a TAC output wire, which I won't use because I'm going to be using a modern digital display. But if I ever need it, it's there. And then these two wires are basically CAN H or CAN L for you DIY, EFI garbage, ugh, DIY EFI guys, or garbage EFI as Luke and Pat like to say, and me. In modern terms, this is ECU A and B, and I plan on running an AIM MXS Strata as my gauges. I think really the only thing I'm going to retain from the stock DeLorean setup, I mean, they're all going to stay in there, but I'm really only going to use probably the amp gauge and the fuel gauge. Everything else will go through the modern display, which I'm going to tuck up in there behind the steering wheel. So that's it. It's getting close now. I got to go wire the fuel pump and the fans. And I'm just going to get those wired so I can test each circuit. And then when I get that done, I'll come back, plug a computer into this for the first time, and individually test each circuit and see if we got it right. If they all check out, then I'm going to try to test fire the motor. So, pretty exciting day. This is pretty exciting, folks. I've plugged the EC in for the first time. I've got fuel pressure, throttle positions registering, all of this, whatever the hell this means. Numbers are better than nothing, so anyhow, I'm getting ready to attempt start for the first time. Don't know what's gonna happen. Alright, well, we're just gonna give it a go. This is gonna be my first start attempt. It may work, it may not. We'll find out together. I do want to check and see if the throttle is responding to the computer. Well, it is. That's good news. I got a bunch of numbers, ones and zeros, and bings and bongs and stuff, so let's see what happens. Alright, I'm in neutral. Here we go. Well, first fail is I forgot to connect the starter wire, so let me fix that and then I'll come back. Alright, I got the starter temporarily hooked up. I missed one wire out of like 100, my bad. Anyways, this thing is got no exhaust, no intake. I just want to hear it fire up. It might not run great, but it should run. And that's all I want. So here we go. Well, it didn't start, so I gotta troubleshoot now. Alright, let's try this again. Found the problem, the fuel pump wasn't pumping. Still not showing fuel pressure on the motor, but I think it's gotta be running to show that, so let's give it a try. Well, keep troubleshooting. All right, here we go. Hell yeah! That's a success right there. All right, well, today is an important day in history. April 6th, 2022. Great time traveling date. My car runs. 2 years in the making. Really stoked to hear that thing run. I blew soot all over the car because it has no exhaust on it. Bad news is the fuel pump's not flowing enough to keep up with the high pressure fuel pump. So my Delphi FG0089 unit is just not flowing enough pressure by volume. Gallons per hour really is the issue. So I'm gonna have to come up with a higher flowing fuel pump than that. Small potatoes. The good news is I can now make this mess go away and finalize everything. I can make my exhaust, I can make my intercooler setup, and I told everybody that this thing would run by the open house. It runs. I'm hoping I have it driving by the open house, but we'll have to see. I'm really stoked. This frame off started the fall of 2020 with my buddies Jesse and Daniel and his son. We pulled the motor and transmission out of this thing. And then I started just doing some stuff, and I wasn't gonna do a frame off, and then my uncle was like, or no, it wasn't Rich was like, oh, you should do a frame off. And I started doing that. And then my uncle's like, bring the frame up. So so underneath, we've got a brand new car. Now it's time to put everything back together, and I can start making it pretty on the outside too. But it drives. I put it in gear, it moves. This is the first Ecoboost powered DeLorean in the world. And I am now an exclusive vendor for Kennedy Engineering, so I can make your car the same way. And now that I've figured out all the problems, the next car build will be a lot faster than this. So proof and concept, it runs. Hey Steve, my car runs. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. And also, I hope you appreciate the fact that I filmed all of my mess ups and screw ups and showed you that it doesn't always start like it does on TV. Junkyard harness problems. But stay tuned. We'll see you next time.